What's up? What's going on? Welcome back to the channel. And jumping right into it, man, we're talking about this Prodigy trigger and fitting the Atlas trigger to the Prodigy frame. Let me get some zoom for y'all. So I had watched a video on a guy and how he did his, and I was pretty much going to do it the same way. But once I got the gun taken apart and I was messing with it, I figured I'd do mine a little bit differently. Because when he did his, he did a little bit additional modification to the frame. And I was trying to modify the frame as little as possible. And I did more modification to the actual trigger bar. Because in my mind, if I mess up the trigger bar, I mean, it's only 60 bucks versus me having to go get a whole new frame. So that's kind of like how I did it, the way I did it. So with the stock trigger, to keep it real, I didn't really have any issues with the stock trigger. The main reason why I wanted to swap the trigger out is because I wanted a flat face trigger. And I really don't like the curve joint in most triggers. And the trigger I went with, this is the Atlas. This is the medium blue flat face trigger. And it looks super dope, man. I really like the way the trigger looks. So when you are fitting the trigger, it only took a little bit of work. It didn't take a lot. And the issue was when the trigger goes in the gun, right? I'm going to show you. The trigger bar on the Prodigy, the stock one, this one right here is pretty thin. And when the trigger's going in and out, there's plenty of space for it to clear this part of the frame. Like you can literally see you can see a gap almost in here. And that's where the Atlas trigger was getting caught up on. Also, when the trigger is sliding into the frame, it was getting caught up in this area too, and it needed just a little bit of work to make it fit. So when I watched the video that I watched initially, the guy basically, he had a file and he filed down both of these parts, this little shelf in here, to kind of give it a little more clearance so that the trigger bar can slide in there. And then he filed down the inside of this part as well so that like the trigger shoe can slide in there. And as stated, I had like some files laying around, and you can get a kit like this from pretty much anywhere like Amazon, Harbor Freight or something like that. I was just going to use these files and file down that area in there. But trying to file this area down, man, is very tight. And I want it to be consistent all the way across. Also got a Dremel that could probably get in there, but I kind of don't recommend using a Dremel. I think a Dremel is a little too aggressive. You might take off more material than you really need to. So I didn't want to go that route either. So then my question was like, how much material do I need to take off? So I wish I would have measured this before I cut it, but the Atlas trigger bar, it's just slightly too thick to slide into that slot on the frame. And it's not by a lot. It's just, man, it's just a little bit. It only need a little bit of modification. So to me, I told myself it'd be easier just to modify this trigger bar than to actually be cutting on that frame. And the way I got my trigger bar filed down is I had this old sharpening stone. And this is just from, you use this to sharpen a knife. And it's just 2 grits. One side is 240 and the other side is 120, right? So the way I did it, I basically unscrewed the trigger off of the trigger bar. And then I laid the trigger bar down on the stone. And I basically just filed it, you know, one way. Just did a couple swipes. Kind of test fitted in the frame to see if it fit. And I just did that a couple times until the trigger bar fit into the frame. And I'm going to show you like what this looks like on the stock trigger. When the stock trigger sits in here, I'll give you some more zoom. You can see that it moves very freely coming back and forth. And when you get the Atlas trigger right out brand new, like I said, it was getting caught up in here. So once I did just a little bit of filing, you can see now, once this trigger's in here, let me get this thing in here. Oh. Once the trigger's in the frame now, it moves very freely. It almost moves better than the than the stock joint. And I think it moves more freely just because the trigger bar is all polished. And if you look in there, you can see how much clearance it is. And it's just like, it barely clears just by a couple millimeters, but I wanted to remove just as little material as possible to make it function. Now, also what I was saying, the trigger was getting caught up in this part right here of the frame. So I had seen another video where a guy had made a modification to the actual trigger to make it fit. So I didn't think I needed to do that, because if you look at how the trigger sits in the frame, you can see the space at the top. So it already clears it. It's just this little piece right here is where it was getting hung up on, right? So when I filed that part down, I had to use a specific file. This is the file I used. So the top part of this is flat, and then this bottom part is kind of round on this file. And the way I did it was, when you slide this file inside here, like I said, this bottom part is round. I just did a little bit of filing back and forth, just a little bit, just ever so slightly, just to give it a little bit of relief. So that way, when that trigger slides in there, it clears the frame. And like I said, when you look it in there, you can see the space. So it's just enough space, and it's moving very freely, very easily. So it didn't take that much, man. It probably took me, I mean, once I had the gun fully disassembled, it might have took me, I don't know, man, maybe 10, 15 minutes just to make the little modification. And then once you get that, man, that's it. And as stated, the problem areas on the trigger is like the actual trigger shoe was touching the frame in here. So you need to do just a little bit of work right here. And then on the trigger bar was touching the top of the frame, and it was not allowing the trigger bar to slide into the frame. It was getting hung up on here. So the two ways you can either do it, you can either get you a file and file down these parts of the frame, or you could do like I did and just file down the top of the trigger bar just a little bit. And when I had the trigger bar on the stone, I didn't do the whole length of the bar. I only did it to about maybe about a centimeter or so right here. That's as far as I did it. And like I said, I took the trigger off of the bar. I'm gonna take the trigger off the bar so I can show you. I took the trigger off the bar, and I just laid it on the stone. Man, this thing got all kind of thread. There we go. And I just laid it on the stone, laid it flat. And like I said, I probably did about this much on the stone. And I just did one direction, passes, you know. I did a couple passes with the 120. And then I did some more passes with the 240 until it got smooth. And like I said, I just a little bit so that it can fit. And after I did it a couple times, I was kind of just like test fitting it inside the frame to see if it had the clearance. And once I seen I had the clearance, I was like, okay, that's plenty of space. I put the trigger back on the trigger bar. Spin that around a little bit. Slid the whole thing back in. And then once I got that in there, I was just seeing where the problem area was before I modified anything. And once I seen it was just this little bit of piece in the back, just right up in here, just like I said, ever so slightly, I had that file that kind of had like a dome on the back, and just kind of file that just a little bit. And I didn't have to do any modification to the bottom, because also one of the videos I seen, the guy was saying he had did some modification to this part. You didn't have to do any fitting down here. All this stuff fits fine. It's just a little bit of file work here. Did the file work to the trigger bar. And then that's it, man. And it's in there, bro. But that's all you got to do to fit the Atlas trigger to the Prodigy. And another reason I switched the trigger out is because I was doing the EGW internals, and I'm like, man, I'm gonna be here anyway. I might as well just go ahead and just do everything and call it a day. But that's it, bro. That's what it looks like. It's a good looking trigger. I love the flat face. I love the kind of anodized blue looking color. It's gonna be super dope once I get everything together and get it back out to the range. So if y'all got any questions, comments, concerns, man, drop a comment below. At least like the video. Consider subscribing to the channel. And that's all I got for y'all, man. I'm out.